Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome back. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast. It's Tuesday, it's Owner's Stories, and we are up to number 49. I'm running a little bit late. I always say this at the beginning of most of the Owner's Stories. This one's very early in the morning for me. It's almost 7 a.m. here in Bahrain. I'm about to get onto Zoom. I'm about to fire up the Zoom, and I'm going to get Bryan on the line. Bryan is coming in from, I think, Silicon Valley, he told me. I'm not sure exactly where, but he said Silicon Valley. And Bryan's got an interesting story, and a story that I think a lot of us would go through. And it's about choices, and it's about buying something and then realizing you want something else. And I think it's going to be something that you guys can relate to. So I'm not going to ramble on anymore. I'm not going to chat anymore. As I've said in all the other owner stories, if you want to be on a PorscheCooled owner stories, you just contact me through, you can tell it's early in the morning, can't you? You can just contact me through Instagram, PorscheCooled on Instagram. Make sure you give us a follow when you're there. And also michael.bath on Instagram, same place. Anyway, episode number 49. Let me get Bryan through Zoom and let's talk about his PorscheCooled owner story. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Owner Stories number 49. I didn't actually mention this to Bryan before I introduced him, but I actually got my times mixed up and I actually came online yesterday because I'm in such a bit of a daze at the moment with a project we're working on in Dubai that I just don't know where I am. So I came on briefly yesterday, and as soon as I turned on the Zoom, I thought, hang on, this is the wrong day. So anyway, I'd like you all to welcome Bryan to the podcast. Bryan's coming in from Silicon Valley in California. Bryan has his first 911. It's his second Porsche. Good evening, Bryan. How are you today?
Hi, Michael. I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on to the podcast. And I'll just explain to the listeners, I kind of ignored you for a second, but I didn't mean to. I just sort of lost track of, I kind of lose track of some of the messages sometimes. But Bryan contacted me quite a while ago, wasn't it? It was a few months back, I think.
Yeah, I think so, when I bought my first Porsche.
Yeah, when you bought your first Porsche. And then you contacted me again and said you've got your second one. So we got you on. So the guys can hear your story. So let's just get straight into it, Bryan, because I think we've got a lot to talk about with cars and watches today. Yeah. So I like to always start with the same question, and the question is, where did it all begin for you? As I've always said, for me, it happened later in life. Was Porsche something that was always in the background when you were growing up? Was it something that a family friend had or parent had, or was it something you just started noticing, just recently?
So it actually started quite early for me. In the house that I grew up in, the neighbor across the street, the gentleman that lived there had I don't remember the model, but he had a green Targa. This is in the early 80s. So maybe I can't even guess what it was, but he was a tennis playing guy, kind of a country club guy, and he'd always show up and get out, and he'd have his white tennis clothes on. He just struck me as a cool dude. And one day when I was like probably 6 or 7 years old, I got locked out of our house.
Right.
And so I walked across the street over there and said, "Hey, I'm locked out. Do you mind if I hang out here for a little while?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, fine, no problem. Do you want to go for a ride in the car while you're waiting?" And yeah, absolutely, I would. So, funny story. Before we went for a ride, they said, "Are you thirsty?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll take something to drink." And they said, "Do you want a Coke?" And I'm like, "What's a Coke?" My parents had not let us have soda, and it's like, "Yeah, I'll try that." I remember I had one sip and through the roof. But anyway, he took me for a ride in his Targa, and I thought, man, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then times go on and we moved away, and Porsche was kind of off my radar for a while, until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, really, I started thinking about it. And I was paired up with a new engineer at work, and he had moved out from Colorado, and we were going out to see a customer. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll meet you in the garage, and I don't know what you drive or whatever, but around the corner comes this yellow, what ended up being a 996 C4S.
Oh, okay, nice.
And I thought, God, wouldn't it be funny if that was actually him in this 911. And then he rolls the window down. It was like, oh my God, it is you in your 911. So, I guess since then it's something that I've been thinking about. And I just, assumed, oh, Porsche, $100,000. Doesn't matter how old, how new, what it is. I'm never going to buy one. So it doesn't really matter until probably the last 6 months when I really got the bug.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. It was always the same with me. It was always like it was too expensive. You know what I mean? It was either in the back of my mind, it was too expensive to upkeep, too expensive to service, or it was too expensive to get into. And then when you start looking at prices and you start looking at used prices, you realize, hey, I can get into it. I love the guy, the 80s Porsche guy and the tennis gear. I think that's just the picture. I'm seeing an 80s movie here with this guy getting out of it.
Sure.
Please don't tell me. It wasn't red, was it? It wasn't a red Porsche as well?
No, it was like a forest green of some kind. It was really cool.
That's cool. So, okay, so you have these memories as a kid. The guy at work has the yellow 4S, a 996. How does your car journey start though? Because I know a lot of us, we don't always get into Porsche first. Some of us, are into German cars and make our sort of progression into Porsche. What was the first sort of memorable car that you had over your car journey?
Well, I don't want to take you through every car. I've owned a lot of cars in my 45 years, but I guess one of the most memorable was my first car, which at the time was I think it was a 1980 Honda Accord, in that old sort of mint green, early 80s Honda color. And it had 100,000 miles on it. And, I drove that thing into the ground, but I've always kind of been a collector, sort of in by nature. And my watch collecting journey started, very young with a little Pac-Man watch. But, I was always fascinated by nice cars. My parents, we were a middle-class family, and my father always had cars provided to him, company cars for work. And then my mother drove, station wagons and then minivans because she had 3 kids to tote around. Yeah. And I remember asking my father one day, and like, why don't we have a Porsche? Why don't we have a Ferrari? And I remember them telling me one day, well, we could. We just choose to do other things with our money. And
that's a good point.
But it blew my mind as a kid, like, wow, we could actually afford one of those, but we don't.
So
What's wrong with us?
That's the turning point when you realize your parents are quite rich. When you realize your parents are quite, they've done well for themselves and they have the money to do it. But it is about practicalities, isn't it? We all talk about this. Yes. And so many people on owner stories, Brian, it's the same thing. You go through this period of, someone said the other day, very boring and non-memorable cars, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That happen in the lead up. But I think it's interesting how you said you prefer, your parents said they put their money elsewhere. Is that how it sort of started with you? Did that kind of rub off on you in a way, as in, and I'll tell the listeners, we'll talk about it, but you're an avid watch collector, as you said, you collect watches, you collect Rolex. Was that the thing that was more of a priority to you than getting, a Ferrari or a new Porsche?
So it actually was exactly the opposite. I grew up thinking, well, why would I have money and save it when I could go buy a BMW or I could go buy, a Submariner, which through high school was like, the end all be all, of ultimate things. So, it actually ended up working out opposite. And my father, later in life told me, gosh, I wish we would have talked a little bit more about this, because you've gone through quite a few cars and you've spent a lot of money on some pretty weird things. And so it backfired, I guess.
Okay, so you have the Honda Accord. You have any other memorable cars you want to tell the listeners about, or is there anything else that was substituting for a Porsche that you were sort of always wanted to have during that time?
I think like many of us, BMW, I had a couple of early 3 Series. I had sort of the famed 325 IS and the older sort of sled-like 2-door coupe, which was super cool. And I went through quite a few of those. And I remember the first time I was able to get a new one, I ordered a a 330 with the M Sport trim package. And to me, that was just sort of the pinnacle of car ownership, and the performance was amazing. And I got to spec every little thing back when, you could order a car and 40 days later it would show up at the dealer. Those are the good old days.
The good old days. I was going to say, yeah, the good old days.
Yeah. But it happened to be right before my son was born. And so I thought, God, I can't be ripping around town with my young son in the back of this car. So, that lived a very short life with me, and then we went into a Lexus hybrid SUV, and my car sort of aspirations had to die for a little while.
Okay. Did you find, back to the BMW, because you've owned one of the iconic ones, one of the ones that people are searching out for now and they're harder to find in Australia, and I think even in the UK they're becoming harder to find. The 325 IS. Was that something at the time when you owned that car? Was it something that you thought was a special car? Or it was just a normal BMW?
It was special to me because it was my first, but there was no feeling, back then nobody was any the wiser, right? It was just, I'm lucky to have a BMW. It's pretty sporty. It's 2-seater. My girlfriend at the time loved it. And, I wish I would have known now, like everything, what I knew back then, but it ended up after like 8 months, I got in an accident in the rain and it got totaled. But no, it was just a BMW, really.
I remember I used to work with someone going back now quite a few years, and they had a very old one of those, and it was so beat up, but it wasn't a convertible and it wasn't the coupe. It was like a Targa top one where the back folded down, the back part of the back window folded down. Have you ever seen those?
Interesting.
No. I was thinking about this the other day because I was speaking to someone else who also owned the same car, the 325 IS. And I was thinking about that car, that it did come in as some sort of a Targa version, which I kind of forgot about, which was kind of a cool car when you saw it. I don't think there was very many made though. All right. So you go into the cars, you go into the family cars, you've got bigger responsibilities than driving around in a Porsche. What happens? Let's get on to the first Porsche so we have enough time to talk about the watches as well. So the first Porsche, you decide you want one. You're still not ready for a 911. You still need something more practical. So what do you start searching for when you decide, okay, I'm going to get a Porsche?
So I was 100% ready for a 911, having at the time never even driven one, right? And at the time we had I bought a Jaguar F-Pace, the SUV in its first year. Yep. And it was a great car in a lot of ways and terrible in all the Jaguar ways, but it was a supercharged, 380 horsepower. And it was my first like sort of proper European performance car. And then, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, I'd come off, some pretty good times at work and just thought, that was getting a little long in the tooth, and it was probably time to dive into a Porsche. So I broached the subject with my wife and said, hey, I'm going to start looking for a 911. And she said, you're crazy. We have a 4-door family sedan and a Tesla, and you can't get a 911. Where are we going to put everything when we go to the mountains? Where are you going to do this? What are you going to, and I think she sort of had that same feeling too of, Porsche, it's $100,000. No chance. No way. Yeah. And I said, okay, well, how about we get 3 cars? And she's like, oh, you're out of your mind. No chance. So, all right, fine. I got to pick my battles, right? And I actually went to a local dealership to go drive some Cayennes. And I had driven a couple, certified pre-owned ones, and it just wasn't giving me the experience I needed. They're naturally aspirated. I had a supercharged, SUV. Yeah. And so I went back to the dealership kind of deflated. And the guy said, well, I know what you're coming from. Have you ever tried a Macan? And I was like, no way, man. I would never. It sort of had like this Boxster connotation, Yeah. And I said, I would never drive one of those. He said, look, I've got an S on the lot. It's twin turbo. Give it a shot. Just take it out. Come back whenever you want and let me know what you think. And man, I was hooked right away. So I was actually looking into buying a car that he had
Right.
And then did as we always do and got online, and I found basically the same car with a slightly better spec at a different dealer for like $9,000 less than what they were asking.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Certified pre-owned, it had 18,000 miles on it. It was, the experience was very euphoric. It's like, my first Porsche, and it's actually practical, and, it's low miles. And I just never knew such a thing existed.
So tell the listeners exactly what you bought. So you bought it from a Porsche dealer, or you bought it from just a specialist dealer?
Yeah, I bought it from a Porsche dealer. At that time, that was important to me to get a certified car because, like we discussed earlier, it's, oil changes must be $500 and maintenance must be $1 billion.
Yeah.
So I definitely want one certified. And it, he just happened to have this really well-priced low mileage example. So it was a white Macan S with black leather. Had a premium plus package, which is, had the moon roof. It had heated and cooled seats. It had all the bells and whistles. And to be honest, the thing that I was most excited about is the cooled seats. There's plenty of summers in dress shirts getting out with a wet back and from sitting in a sweaty car. And, but obviously PDK, and it was the first time that I'd driven a PDK car. And man, what a transmission and what an experience that was.
So what model year is it, Bryan?
It was a 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you made the right decision with the Macan. I mean, Steve talks about his wife's, turbo that they bought, and that was used. And, buying them used is, his was probably, I think his is about a 2013 or something like that. It's a lot older. 2013, 2015 maybe. But, buying it used and saving, I mean, he saved a big chunk of money on that car. Being the turbo, he saved a lot because when he was looking, the GTS was more expensive than the turbo used. The turbo was less than the GTS, which was a bit strange. And it seems to still be the case in Australia anyway, on Australia used market. But so the deciding factor for the Macan was mainly the transmission, though, when you drove it, because I've heard this story before that people get into the Cayenne, and that transmission's a bit of a letdown because it's not PDK. Was that the deciding factor, the more sportiness of the Macan?
Yeah, for sure. It was it was the transmission. It was the lack of, sort of that turbo supercharged punch that I was used to. It seemed like it would have been a bit of a downgrade for me. And in my head, the way I'm quite an impulsive guy sometimes, when I'm driving back to the dealer trying to rationalize it to myself, like, okay, well, it is still a Porsche and I've always wanted a Porsche and it's this and it's that, but I just couldn't live with the performance of this thing. And, so it was all those things.
Yeah. So let's get on to that. So you wanted a 911. Your wife says you're crazy. At that time, your wife said you're crazy. So you buy the Macan. How long before, when you're driving the Macan, and how long before did you think, hang on, I really do want a 911? How long did that take?
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And,
okay.
Yeah.
That's not good.
And this is where, I'm holding you and Steve and Spike and Zimmerman, Zuckerman and all these guys accountable, because then I started, really getting into the brand, and listening to the podcasts and really doing some research that way. And I'm thinking, God, maybe I'm just an anomaly here. But then I started listening to some of your owner stories. And I think there was a gentleman in Chicago, 996 Shy, who's got a Macan and then got a 996. And like, okay, well, maybe I'm not alone here. And I just, I typed in Porsche 996 one day and 3 or 4 of your episodes showed up, and I listened to every single one of those. And then, my brain just starts going in a million different directions on, maybe I've made a mistake here, or maybe there's an opportunity to add something. But it wasn't until I like to really get into brands or people or whatever when I'm into it. It's I think part of the collector mentality. So 2 weeks in, I'm actually driving my Macan, listening to your podcast, going, this is not scratching the itch. I've got to have a 911.
Okay, so, and I think, the PorscheCooled podcast, I guess there's been a lot of people on with 996s. There was a lot of owner stories there with a lot of 996 owners. So it is, I guess, there is a lot of great information from people who have bought the car. And there's been a lot of Cabriolet. There's been a lot of Cabriolet owners as well for the 996.
Yeah.
So do you think, though, you've got other cars in your garage. You've got, Teslas and other cars. Do you think, okay, I'm going to keep the Macan? Did you keep the Macan or did you just sell the Macan?
So for a hot minute, I thought, I've got to find a way to keep the Macan because, it's low miles. It's under warranty for, forever. And I really do like it. But, knowing my wife, I knew there was no way she was going to let us own 2 Porsches. So I had to sort of come to grips with it's one of the 2 has to go. And I've got to figure out, do I really want a 911 that bad or not? And I drove the Macan like, I guess you could say like I'd get up early during the week and I'd get a coffee and open the roof and I'd go on the back roads, the local back roads and put it into sport mode. And, I really drove it like a sports car. But I knew there was no way she was going to go for it. And I think at the time as well, the car market is, as you know, has gone bananas.
Yes.
And I thought, well, maybe I can get a little more for this thing than I bought. And I put quite a bit of money down. So I had a pretty good equity position in it. And so I started researching what people would pay for my car. And I ended up selling it for, I think, $2,800 more than I paid. So I found an opportunity to make a little money in a pretty short time. And that's part of how I rationalized it, in my own head.
How short was this time, Bryan? How long did you own it for?
Maybe 2 months.
2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
And you probably heard Steve talk on the Friday's episode of the podcast before about his wife's Macan being the turbo. And he feels the same as just not, obviously he's comparing it. He's getting out of his 997 GT3 and he's getting into the Macan. It just doesn't feel the same. As nice as it is, the PDK and everything and inside the cabin, but it just isn't a 911. So how do you see the Macan? Do you see the Macan, is the Macan like the Tudor to the Rolex? Is that how you see it? Or is it something else?
I originally saw it that way. That's a great comparison. And then once I drove it though, I realized, this is not the case. And I had watched a million YouTube videos on the Macan and I was pretty convinced that the 4-cylinder Macan was kind of the Tudor to the Rolex. And I always kind of felt like, I joined my, the local chapter of PCA, the Porsche Club of America, and they ask you what kind of car you have. And I'm like, do I tell the truth? Or do I say, I drive something cool? And I'm like, no, I drive a Macan S, and you put the VIN in there. And I always felt like I'm halfway there. And it's silly, I know, but it was just something that I got hung up on.
Yeah, and I think, Stephen in Sydney, who's got the 66 912 that's getting restored, had a Macan, or still has a Macan. I can't remember. Sorry, Stephen, if you're listening. And I think he was... I'm losing my train of thought. I think he had the same sort of thoughts, you know what I mean? That he wouldn't be welcomed into Porsche Club. He wouldn't be welcomed by the drives and stuff like that. And he was saying, no, he went on all the, the Porsche Club of New South Wales drives in Australia, and he, the community was great, even though he had a Macan. You know what I mean? So I think Porsche people in general are quite welcoming because they can see that you're getting into the brand. And they can see that you will progress to something. Most people do progress to a 911 or to a Boxster or to something more sportier than an SUV, than a smaller SUV. So you haven't owned this car for very long. You spontaneously decided you're going to sell it. It's not giving you that feeling that you wanted because deep down you wanted a 911. And we all go through this process. You know what I mean? We all go through this process. We all start looking for a certain Porsche, whether it be, even if you're looking for a 996 to a 997, we always decide what we want. And I know some people make not the wrong decision, but the right decision at the time, which turns into be the wrong decision, and then move into something else. So you've got the Macan, you sell it. Do you find your next Porsche, the 911, how do you find that? Do you find that locally? Is it at a dealer? How does that come about, Bryan?
Yeah, so I didn't sell it right away. I thought I'd dip my feet in the water a little bit, and I had told my sales guy at the Porsche dealer, like, if you see a nice 996 or 997, let me know. Um, and I'd gotten to know him quite well because like I said, I really like getting into things, and I said, well, let's talk about new Porsches. Not that I'm going to buy one, but it was like, well, it used to be, if you wanted a GT car, you'd have to get an allocation for it. But these days, you've got to get an allocation just to order a 992, for example, because the lead times are so long.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, well, I should go drive one of these things. Because mind you, I had not driven a 911 at this point. I just decided I got to have one of these things. And so I went on Auto Trader and Cars, all the usual sites. And I went down to this very lowbrow independent that had it was an '03 C4S 996.
Okay.
I thought, okay, well, these guys don't know me. I don't know them. I'm just going to go drive the car and see what I think. And I got in the car and it started really rough. And he's like, oh yeah, it's been sitting here for a while. And so we drove it on the freeway and it was making all kinds of noise, squeaking and rattling. And, on my way back to the dealer, the car died on the road.
Really?
And I got out and I was like, hey pal, I can't sit here all day for this tow truck to come. But, and it was within walking distance to the store anyway. So I had to walk back there. But then in my head, I'm thinking, what am I doing? Like, I've got all these modern I've got, electric assisted steering. I've got ventilated seats. I've got PDK, and this thing just really took the wind out of my sails. And so I just decided, okay, this must be an anomaly. I'll just keep looking. So again, I back to the normal sites, and there's a dealership, a Porsche independent, that was around the corner from a place I used to work 25 years ago.
Okay.
And used to go by there all the time and look at the Porsches. It was probably, first generation 996s at the time. And I thought, I'll go to their site and see what they got. And the car that I ultimately bought, they had. And so I went down there after doing a bunch of research and talked to the guy and drove a couple of cars and decided that way. That's how I found it.
So the car you found,
Yes.
What was the deciding factor? What was the deciding factor, though? Why did you buy that car?
I think it was a couple things. One, it was a 996, and I just decided from the research that, budget wise, that was probably the right thing for me. It was a Cabriolet. I did not want a Cabriolet. It's a Tiptronic. I was fairly convinced I didn't want a Tiptronic. Having never driven one, it's just the community tells you, oh, you buy a manual or nothing, right?
Yes.
Okay. But it was a one owner local car that he didn't have actual service records, but in the Carfax, every single service was documented and what they had done. Okay. And sort of, I could see, okay, this was done at regular intervals. In fact, I was just looking at it the other day, the last 6 years, the car has only been driven, I think, 1,800 miles in the last 6 years.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Is the market being the way it was, you can't be, and I think I learned this from you, you can't be too picky about things.
You can't. And that's how I am with the 912, and I've missed out on so many, and now the prices are going absolutely crazy. Like, Bring a Trailer the other day, there was one that sold, and I can't even say the price, it was so high. It was a good example, but it was just, it's 911 money now. It's getting to 911T money, which is insane. Okay, so tell the listeners, we haven't mentioned it, it's in the title, but tell the listeners exactly what you bought. And I know you know exactly what options the car has because I've seen the image on your Instagram. So let's go through the car, let's go through the options, and then I want to talk to you about the service history and the Tiptronic as well after that. So what did you buy, Bryan?
So I bought an 01 911 996 C2 Cabriolet. It's in Lapis blue. Which is not a color that was on my radar. It's black leather interior, and it is a Tiptronic. And yeah, I've already run up quite a tab at Suncoast, but in searching for little things, I'd found that, hey, if you just give us your VIN, we'll send you the build sheet. So I've got it in front of me, and it's got 18-inch, the turbo look twist wheels, wheel caps, stability management, the supple leather. So the softer, it looks sort of a bit wrinkled.
That's sorry, Bryan. That's exactly what's in the turbo, isn't it? That's the turbo leather, I think.
I believe so. Yeah.
In the 996 turbo, yeah. Nice feature.
And it's full leather, so it has the leather dash and all of that. Floor mats, comfort, Technic, dimming mirrors, and leather steering wheel, which I replaced before I even picked it up. So it was fairly well optioned for what it was.
It's very well optioned. I mean, that option list alone, and I think it's got the original price on there, hasn't it? On your option list on Instagram, and I think what is it, 96,000, isn't it? The original price.
Yeah, the
with
original
options.
Base price was 79, and with options 96. So
the person that originally bought this really did spec it out well. I wonder what Technic package is. Do you know what that is? What is included?
I don't have any idea.
I have never seen that before.
It's $2,400.
Yeah, I've never seen that before. I wonder what's in that. But you definitely found I can see why you were tempted, and you did buy this car because of all the options and because of the service. It's weird how cars don't come with service history, but the service history is there, isn't it? I mean, it's strange that it's not with the car. I guess people just don't think to keep things like that.
Yeah.
So the Tiptronic, and we know all the full-on Porsche purists are against Tiptronics. I've had a few people on owner stories with Tiptronics, and and have liked them, have liked that transmission. Andrew 911 South, very early owner stories. He had a 993. I'm gonna have to pull on my memory here. 993 was a Tiptronic. There's been Cabriolets with Tiptronics. Due to the family, wanting their wife to drive the car. How was that decision when you had to buy the car? Because you see it, I think the Lapis blue is a great color, by the way. I think that's one of I know you said it wasn't your first choice, but I think it's actually a pretty nice color in the 996. I think it's one of the nicer blues. Midnight blue and Lapis blue, I think, are quite nice blues. So what about the Tiptronic? Was it a stumbling point for you? Did you think, I really do want a manual, I'm not going to do this car, or you got over that pretty quickly?
I got over it pretty quickly. To show you how big of a fanboy I am, Andrew 996 South, the 996 he inherited from his father actually was a Tiptronic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it's funny on one of the Instagram accounts, I had to set up a whole separate Instagram account, and I'll explain why if you care. But a little meme popped up in one of the stories that said, when are guys going to stop blaming their wives for actually buying Tiptronics? I was like, hey, wait a minute. You don't have to call us out like that. But, I drove it and I was actually pretty impressed. It's no PDK, but I'm thinking, I haven't driven a manual car in well over 28 years. And it was actually pretty quick. And I thought, does this thing actually any slower than if I was shifting myself? And when I was looking at my car, I'd actually driven an 08 997.1 S, also in a Tiptronic. And it had more horsepower, but I didn't feel it. And that car actually had it made a lot more noise, squeaking and rattling. And it was another 20 grand. And I just thought, this is not my last 911, obviously. So for what I'm thinking I'm going to do, this lesser price one is the right way to go. And I honestly, I expected to hate it and make excuses to myself why a Tip. I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, and I think you just found a good balance when you bought the car. Do you know what I mean? You've weighted up. You want a 911. And Andrew, I think it was Andrew actually, 911 South, that said, even in the roads around his area, it was, you had to work it a bit more, but he said it was, it was a good driving experience. There was nothing wrong with the driving experience. I remember him saying that. And like I said, other people, I can't remember off the top of my head who they were, but he said it was a good driving experience. So it's a well-optioned car. It's in an unusual color. It's a 996, which everyone wants at the moment.
Yeah.
You got it at a pretty good price. The Cabriolet is coming into its own, really. I mean, people are really looking at the cab again. especially in climates like California and climates like Australia, people really do want a Cabriolet. And I like the look of the Cabriolet. And I think the 993 is having the same resurgence. You know, the 993 Cabriolet, I think people are, I don't know whether that's Nick Murray's influence or someone else's, but it really is coming into its own. So you pick up the car. Was there anything that you needed to do straight away? You pick up the car. Before we get into that, actually, you pick up the car and you're driving it home for the first time. What's the feeling, Bryan?
So I did have a PPI, taking notes from you guys, which I maybe wouldn't otherwise have done. And so there were a few things that needed to get done that the dealer had agreed to take care of. So, I had signed for the car. I didn't actually get to drive it home for, 7 or 8 days.
Okay.
And so I just had all this pent up, I wasn't able to sleep at night. I'm watching every YouTube video about 996 and I'm just driving myself crazy. Right.
Yeah.
And then driving it home the first time was a very high and a very low because the check engine light came on my way home. But it was euphoric. I mean, it's everything that, everyone else would have experienced. And, I realized that I've become the guy that I used to mock, gray haired guy, convertible down, Aerosmith blasting on the radio and, just with a big grin on his face. But that's what it was. That's exactly how it was. But
it's still a good feeling. And for me, that feeling in the back of my head is, what was wrong with me? Why didn't I do this earlier? Do you know what I mean? It wasn't that you couldn't afford to do it earlier. You just didn't do it earlier. Why didn't I do this earlier? And that's the thought I remember having it when I first really drove my 997. So you say you did the PPI. I'm glad about that. I love the PPI.
Yep.
How was the list? Did it scare you when that list came through? Because we all know a lot of places will mark down everything. And Marco, who was on the previous owner story, who's Steve's cousin, with his 996, he said the list was, very, very long. And at first he just couldn't look at it. Was that how it was for you?
It actually wasn't too bad. I don't know that it was the most detailed PPI, but I remember calling the shop and they said, hey, well, it's $500. If you don't want us to take photos and do all this stuff, I'll knock $100 off. I said, okay, well, here are the things that worry me. And the list was actually quite short. So there was the PSM and ABS warning light had come on and they had figured it was something to do with the throttle body because the throttle body was loose, so that needed to be replaced.
Right.
They found a rat's nest lodged into the intake manifold, which I've found is not all that uncommon for a car that sits for long periods of time. And rats and rodents apparently like the soy used in the wiring harness or something like that. So that needed to be removed. It needed a new gas cap. And there was a rear main deck seal for the convertible top that needed to be removed. And that was it. I mean, it's sort of the anxiety of when you're buying a new house and the inspection comes back and you're just hoping that, there's not a list of a million things. And it was all minor stuff. And I told the dealer, look, it's a 20-year-old car. I don't expect it to be brand new, but I don't particularly want a rat's nest in the thing. And so he said, okay, well, we'll take care of it. I want you to be happy, And so it was quite easy. Oh, sorry. They pulled, I did have them pull the oil filter and cut it open and look for metal, being that it is a 996.
Yeah, I was going to get into that actually.
They didn't find anything. So
okay. So it hasn't had the IMS solution done?
No, it hasn't.
And has your car, based on all the service records that you've seen, does it indicate that the clutch or anything has been replaced during ownership?
Well, it's a tip, so no clutch.
Oh, no clutch. Sorry. What am I thinking of? Sorry.
But I did go through and started looking at other cars saying, well, I wonder if it will call it out on a Carfax. Will it say, alternator replaced, water pump, IMS? Yes. And it doesn't. So I guess the advice was look for clutch replacement. And if that's been replaced, hopefully it's been done. But no, it hadn't been done. I had brought that up and cylinder scoring up with the shop, and they said, look, don't get too worked up over all that stuff. If you service it regularly with us, he said, it's not like the IMS will just die tomorrow. There will be some leading indicators. And so he said, look, what you ought to do is drive it 3,000 miles, come back for an oil change. We'll open the filter again.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't ever see anything in the filter, you're probably okay.
That's good advice, actually. It's good advice. What was the mileage of your car, Bryan? Sorry, the mileage?
63,000 and change. So low miles.
Very low miles. Very low miles. Yeah, and I think that the cutting open of the oil filter, and I know that, where I take my car in Sydney, I know they do that as well. And it's a good check. I know some people go to the extreme. Well, they go to the point of getting the oil analyzed. Is that something that you would do?
I thought about it and I asked them about it, and they said, you know what, it costs, I don't remember what the price was. But he said, let's not do that now. I could do that and I could bore scope it and charge you another, $800-900, but let's just see if there's any sort of indicator. And if there is, I'm happy to do the rest. If there isn't, let's not do that. And, like I said, the whole relationship thing, and it, maybe this is all part of their scheme, but I thought, here's a guy saying he could charge me more, but he's not. And it's sensible. So,
yeah,
all right,
sounds genuine.
I'm going to follow his advice.
Yeah, it sounds genuine. And we've heard that before. I've heard, who's been talking about driving the car. Oh, that's right, Matt Farah. I know on Smoking Tire with his Ferraris, different thing altogether. But how that guy that he uses always says, drive it and then bring it back to me and then I'll look at it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same with Porsches. I know other people have said that as well. Drive it and then we'll check it again and see how it goes. There's no point doing it now if it doesn't need to be done. I think that's good advice. It sounds like it's a good specialist. So you've got the 911. You just said you've been going crazy at Suncoast. I know when I bought my 997, I was doing the same because the prices at Suncoast were crazy. The very first thing I bought from Suncoast was a new air conditioning unit, which was a bit crazy because I hated the worn buttons on mine. What are the things you've been buying? What have you been adding to your 996?
So let's see. The first thing I ordered was a blue leather keychain, because I'm just a dork like that. And then I bought new wiper replacements, just figuring it's an old car. I'll buy those. I bought a cell phone holder, the Rentec one. I bought a shelf to replace the CD shelf because there is no. I've got the two cup holders, so there's no shelf area. So I bought one of those. I bought the little cup shelf that replaces the ashtray, which I just swapped out myself.
Right.
A couple of nights ago. I was quite proud of myself for that. Let's see, what else? I bought a cleaner and a conditioner for the convertible top. I bought an owner's manual because I didn't think it had one. Turns out it does. So just a bunch of small things. Oh, I bought the little ring around the ignition, is leather and it's quite worn from, I'm sure, just being stabbed with a key for 20 years. Yep. So I bought a new one of those.
Yeah, I've got that part as well.
So a bunch of little things.
Yeah, I'm looking, actually, I want all the listeners to go to Bryan's Instagram, actually. So it's Manuel 996 or Manuel 996, MANUELL_996 on Instagram. So make sure you go over there and give Bryan a follow. The image where you replaced the center console, so you replaced it with the open one. It actually looks really good. But you know what looks really nice? The leather, and I never realized this on the 996, that deviated stitch detailing down the center of the center console. It's really, really nice, the leather, that leather detailing in the 996.
Yeah, nice bonus.
Yeah, and the seats as well. Looks good. So what's planned then? Does the car, it didn't come with sports exhaust. You've got the Cabriolet, you've got the open top driving experience. You can hear the sound. Is the sound enough for you, or is it something that you're thinking of, hey, maybe I should do a modification here? So
before even driving the car, I forgot to mention, I bought a upgraded 3-spoke sport steering wheel. Before I even took delivery of the car. I looked on Suncoast and they were like $3,000. Well, I don't want it that bad, but I found one on eBay and the shop swapped that out for me, which was quite a big difference. But through listening to all of your podcast and your experience, I just decided, having never heard it, that it's going to be too quiet. I do want a sport exhaust. And I had planned to do that on my Macan as well. And so, like a good follower, I went to Darren Pfister's website and I rang him up, and it's like, Mister, this is Darren. I was like, whoa, hey, Darren, how's it going? And I just sort of told him my story. And I said, I've been hearing through the community that, you're the guy and it's relatively inexpensive. So how does this work? And it turns out I only live probably an hour's drive from him.
Oh, even better.
So he said, yeah. And he said, because I think I'd asked him, who should I use to do this? And he said, oh, you're just down in San Jose. I'm in Discovery Bay, I think it is, or Brentwood. So he said, I don't have any tip 996 mufflers now, but I should in the next couple of weeks. So just go on the site, make the purchase. When they're done, I'll ring you up. Just drive up here. He's like, give me an hour. I'll swap them out for you and you'll be on your way.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, that's really cool. I've already bought and paid for that.
What did you go for? Sorry, Brian. What did you go for? What finish? Did you just get the standard finish? Did you go for the black? What did you do in the Fiesta?
So I was going to go standard. And then I said, what's the deal with ceramic? And he said, well, ceramic helps dissipate the heat. And in your car, it runs pretty hot. So that's a good idea. And so I thought, all right, let's just get black. I mean, nobody's going to see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up just getting a black ceramic finish.
Yeah, that's what I have. But it's true about the heat. I noticed when I changed mine out when I first got the car as well. And I don't think it's just in my mind, but I think the heat is reduced. You feel it when you go off a long drive. I can feel it at the back of the car. I find that my back spoiler goes up less to cool down than it did previously with the original exhaust.
So hopefully that's ready soon. I can't wait.
It's great that you can go straight to Darren though. He's a great guy, and everyone who hasn't got a Fiesta exhaust, who's got a 996 or 997 should contact Darren. The price is still pretty reasonable. Obviously, the price has gone up since I first bought it, 4 years ago or whatever it was now. But I think once you get that, it's such a good sound. As soon as you get that fitted, Brian, and as soon as you start up the car, you're just going to smile because the sound on idle with that Fiesta is just really, really cool. Really, really cool. Okay, so apart from the exhaust, what else? Is there anything else that's planned?
I don't think, it needs tires. The tires are mismatched. It's got Pirelli P0 Rossos in the back, which are the guy that did the PPI said are about 50%, but it's got these no-name off-brand. I think they're called Iron Man tires in the front, and they're brand new, but I don't know. I've gone this far. I can't. So I don't know if I'm going to just replace the fronts with P0s or, go Pilot Sports or something all the way around. But other than that, for the car itself, I looked into that PCCM sort of double deck unit.
Yes.
And the dealers all quoted me, like $1,900 for the unit, but close to $2,000 for install. They said it's an all-day job.
Wow.
So I'm not doing that. It's got a aftermarket Sony CD player in it that actually has Bluetooth and all that stuff. So I'm quite well sorted with that. And my wife laughs at me, but the first couple of times I drove it, I didn't even listen to it. I turned it off. I just want to listen to the car and listen to the engine. So
yeah, I'm the same.
I think I'm pretty well sorted.
Did it come with the original unit? Did it come with the car or not really?
No.
Yeah, that's the Porsche Classic PCM that they're doing at the moment. That's what I've heard from a lot of people, that the installation is very, very expensive. I think it's because it does actually replace the air conditioning vents, I think, on a 996. It's quite a intricate sort of install, I think. That's why it takes them a long time. It's not just simply just pushing in the unit, pulling it out and pushing it back in. So the paintwork, actually, I'm looking at your Instagram. The paint on your car seems to be in really good condition.
It really is. I've found a couple of little nicks around the front, but it's a 20-year-old car, so nothing really out of the ordinary. There are a few sort of swirls if you really, get into it with a light, but I'm overall really happy with the condition of the paint. And the color, as you said, is stunning. So
since you've got it back, you've only been driving the car, you said, for how many days or weeks now? Not very long, right?
3 days. Yeah.
3 days. You've only had 3 days.
It's going to have to go back to the shop because the check engine light is back on again. But
do they realize what that would be? Is that an easy fix, or is it just an electrical thing?
It came on my way home the first time, and so I went from the highest of highs to just my heart sinking. And I took it back and they said, well, we got a couple of O2 sensor faults. Chances are this thing has just been sitting idle for so long and driven so infrequently that the car is just trying to refigure itself out. So they said, drive it again. If it comes on, come back. We'll reset it again. If it does it a third time, we'll take a look at replacing those O2 sensors. But they said we wouldn't even recommend doing it now. And, again, I thought, okay.
Is that expensive though, the O2 sensors?
I don't know. I've not even looked into it.
So what are you doing then? You're just driving it now. That's what you're basically trying to do. Get as many miles on the car as possible.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I took the family out for the first ride on Friday and put the top down and put my 8-year-old son in the back, and he had wind blowing through his hair, and it was a really cool experience.
Fantastic. So you're enjoying it. And your wife enjoys driving it, or she's not driving it yet?
She's not driven it yet. No,
okay.
Not yet.
So how is it when what are the other cars in your garage? Because I thought this is quite interesting. You've got a few, right? You've got a truck, and you've got an electric. How does it feel going from I'm interested to know, how does it feel going from a 911, analog 911, still analog, even though it's Tiptronic, it's analog. Yeah. How does it feel like going from the 911 to the Tesla?
So so as you mentioned, we've got a Tesla Model 3 that we bought last October. And the day that we all went for a drive in the 996, we were going for dinner at a friend's house. And I said, let's not drive this. It's showing off and da-da-da. So then we drove the Tesla, and it was like, wow, these cars couldn't be any more polar opposite, from the most digital car on the planet, from, one of the most analog. And in between, I bought, actually the same day I signed for my 911, we needed an SUV for, we've got a house in the mountains, and I've got a young son and his friends. And so I bought a used Jeep Grand Cherokee as well, which it turns out I absolutely love. It's just a brilliant car in so many ways. And exactly the same horsepower as it turns out as my 911.
Wow.
Twice as heavy, and but it's a great car. It really is.
So you've got a good garage then. You've got a good variety there. You've got a lot of cars. Which one do you always go to? Do you go to the 911 first?
So, I've only had it 3 days. So not yet. We tend to drive the Tesla more than anything else because, to go 3 miles to the store to fire the 911 up, and I got to move the Jeep out of the way, and it's all a bit of a shell game. So we drive the Tesla the most, and that's probably our go-to.
So tell the listeners about what you sent me in the message, and I think it's pretty interesting. And we do have watch guys on the podcast that listen to the podcast. Some starting their watch journey, like their Porsche journey, and some who are deep into it, like yourself, and I guess like me at the moment. I thought it was interesting. Just the thing about service records and papers, I thought was a really interesting, correlation. Just tell the listeners what you sent me. I thought that was interesting.
So I've been a pretty avid watch collector for the last, 15, 20 years or so. And when I was in high school, the Rolex Submariner was the pinnacle of, of grand possessions at the time. And I had a picture of it on my wall. And I remember the first time I had the means to purchase one. It was a very similar feeling to like the 911. But, as I started to really get into Porsche and understand the history and more importantly, the market, I was able to really relate because there are so many similarities, and I'll just run off a couple. One is you guys always talk about buying the seller, and it's the same thing in watches. And in fact, the last 5 or 6 or so years, I've been really into vintage watches, vintage Rolex primarily, vintage Omega. And you absolutely have to buy the seller. The guy I've done probably north of 50 watches with is a guy out in the DC area.
Right.
That a guy introduced. I've never spoken to him on the phone ever. Never met him. We do everything through Instagram and text, and it's because I trust him.
Yeah. Right.
And so there's a handful of really trusted vintage guys out there. He's Lunar Oyster. There's Yasik. I think he's Watch Hand. There's Gray and Patina, Curtis, and you find these guys that you trust, and you just do things sight unseen. And then I listen to, some of the stories and people buying cars. It's the same thing. And similarly, it's supply chain has thrown us all into a loop. So you can't walk into a store and buy a new stainless steel Submariner. So the guys that want that are ending up buying them on the gray market for 20, 30% more.
Exactly.
And if they're not willing to do that, they're buying 15-year-old Sapphire models. And the guys that wanted the 15-year-old Sapphire models are now priced out. And so they're buying other things. So I think your point of, I chuckled a little bit about Panerai coming back, you may not be far off, because guys that are looking for new modern stuff just have to find other options.
Yes.
Because Rolex you can't get one unless you're really going to pay up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think, the thing with Rolex, and I think, and maybe a lot of people who are listening don't realize this, but you put a Rolex in for service, and Rolex love making things back to normal, modernizing the watch when it goes into service, right? Where they'll change out your dial, they'll change out the glass. So you have to be very specific when you put a watch in for service, and you probably know more about this than me, Bryan.
Yeah.
But when you put a watch in for service, you have to say to them, I don't want that changed. I don't want this changed. And I guess it all comes back to the heritage of the watch, to the originality of the watch, like a Porsche. Like, has it got original glass? Has it got the original dial? It's sort of like there is a relationship there that you can see. With the Panerai thing, I think you're right, and I think Panerai, people that know about watches, Panerai has the early history with Rolex as well. They did have Rolex movements. I think that's correct, right? They did have Rolex movements.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and there is, and Panerai, you have to go back to Panerai in 1999, and it was when it first came out, and it started very slowly, and then it peaked, I think, around 2003, 2004 was like the prime time, I think, or 2006, up to 2006. And then they just brought out so many models. And I guess that as well is a little bit like car manufacturers, you know what I mean? You bring out so many variants. So people are looking for that unique one, the unique one that still exists. And that's what I was talking to you off recording, just to let the listeners know, I'm looking now at the Panerais that were the special editions, that were the sort of rarer ones, the ones within reason, not that really, really expensive one, but within reason. So I think it's a good correlation for sure. It's a good, comparison. I want to go back to how many Rolexes you have first. What was that number? What was that number?
So right now in Rolex, I've got 3. One's out for service at the moment. I do also have. I guess my most recent was. I think you've got one of these. Well, I can't see it. This is great for radio too, by the way. But I picked up one of these silver Black Bay 58s.
Oh, you bought the Black Bay 58.
On the NATO strap, which is just super cool.
Bryan, sorry to interrupt. I wanted that watch so much, and I have a good relationship in London with one of the dealers there in Canary Wharf, where our flat is in Canary Wharf there. And the girl there, Ching, she called me, and she got me one quite quickly. And I wanted it so much, but that point when you go in and you try on the watch, and you still love the watch, and it looked great on my wife's wrist. I was trying to get my wife to buy it, to take it instead, but she didn't want it. But for me, that 39, I just found, and I know people love, all the Hodinkee guys, they love their 36s and their 37s and their 39s. For me, the 39 just felt a little bit small. It just didn't, and I know it's such a small, amount from a 39 to a 40, but it does actually make a difference, and it just didn't work how I wanted it to work, which was unfortunate because it's a beautiful watch, with the strap. It's the same for me. I ordered the one with the strap and it came in, and it was just, it's a beautiful watch. So as you know, and some of the listeners know, then I went and bought the, it just happened by chance. I think 2 weeks later, the Harrods Tudor came in. So I took that instead. Yeah. So I took that one instead, which I absolutely love. It's a really great watch, and I've been wearing it a lot. It's a great one.
I think it's largely to do with what you're used to. I mean, I don't know your whole collection, but if you've got that, I think that's 43 mil?
43, yeah.
Okay, we're both wearing Panerais today that are 44.
44. I tend to wear bigger watches. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, your Explorer 2, which I've had a few of at 42, and that's a great size. And I was very much into the big, I had a was into the Breitling Bentleys back in the day. They were 48, which are just disgusting to me at this point. But it was when I really got into vintage, and I've got the sort of the pride of my again, it doesn't show up, but sort of the grail piece for many vintage collectors is to find, and Rolex guys, is to find a birth year Rolex. And so I was able to find from a good friend that I bought a few things from and traded quite a bit, a birth year 5513 Submariner.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Just has.
I'm looking at that on your Instagram. That's a beautiful watch.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's a beautiful watch. Yeah, absolutely.
And so for there, it makes things like a Tudor and 39 more of what I generally wear. But
that's a 40 millimeter, isn't it? Is that a 40 mil? Or
it's 40.
30?
It's 40, but it's a small 40.
I don't know why 40 seems okay. Like my original Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not a 40. I think they're 39, aren't they? I think they're. That's quite.
No, they're 41.2 or 41.5.
I don't think the one I have is. It's very old.
They did make them in I think 39.
Yeah, mine's like a 70 model. I forget which year it is, 70 model. So it's quite small. That's probably one of the smallest watches I have, I think. I also have a Flightmaster as well, which I don't really wear. It's just sort of kept away. It needs the bracelet repair, it's one of the watches that I want, talking about servicing and whatever. The Omega Flightmaster is actually the watch that I should have brought with me to London. It's still in Sydney, because I wanted to there's a place in London, in the Burlington Arcade in Mayfair. And they will, that store. So they'll actually do the restoration on the watch. They send it to somewhere in the UK. I've kind of looked into it. Or you can send it directly to Omega in Switzerland. I think I'd like to send it directly to Omega in Switzerland, and you can tell them which bits you want to keep. They'll redo the casing, because my casing has almost become smooth now over time because it's quite old, and my case back is like the plane is almost like disappeared, because it's 75 Flightmaster, so it's very original. No box, no papers, but it's a very original watch that I've owned for. My wife bought it for me for my birthday quite a long time ago, but it's a lovely watch.
And I think back to your earlier point, like the question everybody asks in the watch world is, does it have box and papers? And and in Porsche, do you have service records? It's the parallels are so similar. And, the community, I think the communal aspect of watches and vintage watches. And as I found so far in Porsche, I think it's part of why we do it. And I set up a separate account because I started to get friends and family saying, oh, you're always showing off your watches. You're kind of being arrogant. It's like, it's not about that. It's not about flexing. It's about, I got on Instagram originally to share my passion and to see, what everybody else had and to learn and to be part of this community. And I found in Porsche has happened quite quickly. The example, I followed EBITDA, Bernard quite early on and in my 996 account. And we started to have dialogue and, it's so cool to see you're in the game. And I was out on a walk just the other night and I walked by a guy with a big whale tail car. I stopped him and said, that's a cool car. Is it a 964 turbo? He said, no, it's a 930. And I said, oh, wow. Okay. And we sat and talked for 40 minutes about his car and my car and the fact that he's had 996 and they look out for this and do that. And where are you having it serviced? Oh, those are great guys. And it's like, you don't just walk up to strangers on the street and say, hey, how you doing? Tell me about it. And so this community element, I think is really cool.
Yeah. And that's what I love about it. And Porsche community, watch community, I've posted obviously watches on my Michael.Bath Instagram. I probably should have a separate one, but I've met so many, I've been introduced to so many people from posting those few watches and the few videos on YouTube, you know what I mean? And great people that I talk to, in London, all over the place, US, everywhere. And it's great just to talk about, people who get enthusiastic when you get something or you're looking for something and want to talk about it and say, hey, I was looking, like you said, I was looking for the same thing. Like the fact that you bought that Tudor, I wanted it as well. This common thread that we have that you don't always, you don't find when you meet, I know a lot of people here in Bahrain and no one's really, there's one guy actually, But there's no one really interested in watches or Porsches the way that you are, the way that we are. Do you know what I mean? And that's what's great about social media. I think that's what's great about social in general, is that you meet people with similar likes, you get to chat. And like you said, those interactions in the street, you know, I've had those interactions at traffic lights. I've had those interactions when I park the car in Sydney. You know, someone will just come up to me. In fact, the first time I bought the car, Brian, you know, I parked it and someone came and started talking to me about the car. And I'd only literally just picked it up an hour ago. We went and had, you know, ramen and the guy's coming up to me and chatting to me, you know what I mean? Which was like kind of weird, because when I had the Audi, no one came up to me and spoke to me.
Right. And I can't tell you how many times in airports I've stopped guys, or guys have stopped me and said, is that a 5513? Is that a Daytona? And we've just, you know, gotten onto chats. And so it really is cool. And for the most part, there's very little pretentiousness about it. And, you know, going back to my whole thing of like, oh, I have a Macan, are they really going to welcome me into cars and coffee? And it's not about that. It's about the passion and, you know, the things that we just talked about, which I think is so cool. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, you know, vintage Rolexes, I need to get some. I don't really have any.
You need one. Your next one should be.
My next one after... I mean, some of the listeners are probably going, get off the watches already, but I'm going to keep going. The next watch, and I've decided, because I'm struggling to get one in London, and I know it's a lot of people are buying it's not because it's the entry level, it's because I really like it. I want the Oyster Perpetual, and I'm going to get the Oyster Perpetual with the silver dial. And I know a lot of people like all the color dials. This is a watch for the listeners that come in reds and yellows and Tiffany blues and greens and stuff, and they're always really popular. I want the silver dial. I think that I've noticed even on Instagram that the silver dial, people are starting to notice it. I like it because it's just a simple watch. The other watch that I really want is the Rolex Submariner, which comes in, as you know, comes in date and no date. I want a no date. I'm still thinking that I won't, even though I really do like the new model, I still think I want to get the 1406M or whatever it is, 1460.
The 14060?
Yeah, 14060. That one. That's the one I think I will search out eventually.
Well, if you're patient enough and depending on what you want to pay, we should stay in touch, and I can always help you find something somewhere. So
absolutely. Sounds great.
Again, the great part about the community.
Yep, sounds fantastic. And you should tell me those watch dealers that you use. They sound very trustworthy, which I like. Brian, we're almost at the end of the podcast. We've talked about watches for a bit. I hope everyone's enjoyed that. We're going to talk about now, the last thing I like to ask you is favorite drives. You've only had your 911 in your garage for a couple of days. But favorite drives in your area. Someone comes to Silicon Valley. Are there great roads around there? You would say take your 911 on, take your sports car on. What are the roads you're thinking of or planning on driving on once the car is ready to go?
So I'm quite fortunate in that we're sort of on the edge of Silicon Valley and near a town called Morgan Hill and Gilroy, which are much more rural. And there are quite a few, 2 miles out my front door, I can find small, twisty, windy backcountry roads, which I drove the Macan on quite a bit. But as we were doing our first drive on Friday, my wife said, "Hey, we gotta get this thing to Monterey." As all the car guys would know. And so 17-mile drive in Monterey and in the Pebble Beach forest is certainly on our list. And I've driven it 100 times in cars that I didn't care about for the scenery, but quite keen to get there and get the top down on 17-mile drive. It's majestic.
Sounds fantastic. Do you ever plan to, on my list of things to do is to go to Stuttgart and get one of those Porsche Drive 911s and drive it around that region? Is that something you'd like to do?
It's a good question you asked that, because yes, I work, I have a team based in Waldorf, Germany, and my customer actually is based in Germany. So it was never on my radar, but I reckon next time we have a chance to actually get out of the country that I'll make time to go do that for sure.
Yeah. 2023 probably.
Yeah, the
way we're going. All right, Brian, thank you so much. I think we've come to the end. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners about your Porsche journey or your watch journey before we go?
No, just that, thank you. I think one of the things that you mentioned Hodinkee earlier, and one of my favorite features of what they do is the Talking Watches series, which is basically like the owner stories. And, I love when you and Steve get on Fridays and riff about various things, but it's when you can hear like-minded people in similar situations. And I've just really, even if I don't particularly care for their car, their story has been really captivating. And I think your podcast, in particular for Porsche, is really underrated as a source for information. When you're new into it, like I am, or whether you're experienced, I learned a lot from listening to your podcast, and it's been great. I love it. I've listened to every episode, and some of them, 2-3 times.
Oh, that's great. So, thank you so much, Bryan. That's great. I'm glad it's helped. Steve will be laughing. Yeah. Steve will be laughing when he hears this. He says, "But you don't know anything. You're just an enthusiast." Thanks, Bryan. I really, really appreciate it. All right. I think that's it. Thank you, Bryan. Thanks for being on Owner Stories.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. That's Bryan coming in from Silicon Valley in California with his 996 2001 911 C2 Cabriolet in Lapis Blue, a color I really like. And that's about it for today. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.